everybody, and welcome back to the Ultimate Fashion History's 20th Century Style Icon series. In this episode, we're going to ride a white swan, bang a gong, and get it on with glam rock guru Marc Bolan. This episode is dedicated to my beautiful blue-eyed sister Nicole, who, in the early 1970s, was the ultimate Marc Bolan fan. There she is, as an early teenager. If my fashion history is correct, judging by those long wing collars and those puffy bishop sleeves, this picture was probably taken in 1971 or 72, at the height of her Bolan mania. So sis, this one's for you. I made another familial connection putting this video together. I was sort of shocked by how much Marc Bolan resembles my stepfather, Francisco. They are so facially similar. It's weird, isn't it? He should start a tribute band. I wanted to talk about Marc Bolan in this episode, not just because I am a huge T-Rex fan, but because I wanted to use him as the optic through which to discuss how glam rock pop stars really did influence the way that their fans dressed. And I know that there are going to be people out there watching this thinking, come on, Amanda, why don't you talk about David Bowie? Well, I will talk about the wonderful David Bowie in a future episode, but his look didn't really translate to the street. He wore stage costumes, fabulous stage costumes, as he personified all of these various characters he portrayed, like Ziggy Stardust. So his look didn't translate to the street, whereas Marc Bolan's iconic look certainly did. Anyone could wear it. Now, of course, we all associate Marc with the glam rock days of the early 1970s, but in fact, he had been trying to catch a break for a good decade. He was part of that whole swinging London scene. He was one of the original mods, and there he is, modelling some with it mod threads for, I think, Lord John. A very handsome and talented boy. It wasn't really until he grew out his hair into his signature corkscrew curls that he started getting noticed. He then, of course, teamed up with Mickey Finn, and through various incarnations, the band T-Rex was launched. And then everything exploded. Marc Bolan was a true original because he was the very first person to do whimsical, to do magical, unicorns, fairies, woodland. No wonder everybody was talking about Marc Bolan. Nobody had ever experienced anyone like him. He was featured in every legitimate music magazine. You couldn't open one without reading about Marc Bolan. Look at this, the elf who climbed off his toadstool. He really did corner the market on the whole Elfin appeal, but he was the first to do it. He was the elemental child, prophet of a new generation. He was everywhere. Music is a way of putting my fantasies into reality without hurting anybody. There was something so incredibly sweet about Marc Bolan that even grown-ups didn't mind him. Even though he wore makeup and kind of girly clothing, everybody liked Marc Bolan because he was so smart, so sweet, so polite, so good-natured, and so unbelievably talented. Marc Bolan did something really quite remarkable in the early 1970s. He was taken seriously by the legitimate music industry, and yet he was also beloved of the tweens and teens. He was a teeny bopper who was taken seriously. Look at him on the cover of all of these teen magazines. Teenage girls like Nicole were obsessed with him. Look at this. You have been warned. Don't turn to page 5 unless you're in love with him. I have a feeling Nicole turned directly to page 5. I also know that she had this iconic poster of Marc Bolan straddling a toy Jeep on her wall. I was only 6 or 7 at the height of T-Rex mania, so I wasn't listening to T-Rex, I was listening to Disney soundtracks, but I remember I teased poor Nicole mercilessly about her crush on Marc Bolan, so may I take this opportunity, sis, to formally apologize to you for being such a bratty kid sister. But I was a brat who would grow up to be a fashion historian, so let's look at Marc Bolan's signature style. These flared pants and these very tight-fitting jackets with tight sleeves and huge lapels. His whole silhouette was very impish, very skinny. Of course, given that he was a glam rocker, we're going to see a lot of sequins, a lot of paillettes, a lot of glitter. And he also brought in elements of women's wear, or articles that we really only associated with women, like feather boas, like animal print. Sometimes he would just take women's wear off the rack and blend it with his otherwise boyish wardrobe. You see, although he was androgynous up to a certain point, it was really only in terms of fashion. His sexuality was never brought into question. He was an absolute lad and quite the ladies' man. He was also one of the first to do the tight graphic tee under a jacket, like here. But he also brought in quite theatrical elements and made them work as a street style look. For example, his iconic top hat. And here he is wearing his top hat at JFK Airport. He's also wearing a vintage 1940s ladies' jacket. But he looks completely like a boy, right? And he doesn't look as if he stepped right off stage. Sure, he looks trendy, but he doesn't look so theatrical. Whereas Bowie, he wouldn't be wearing this at JFK. He couldn't get on a plane wearing this, not unless he bought 2 tickets. And whereas David Bowie's makeup was very theatrical, almost like a beautiful kabuki makeup, Marc Bolan was basically a bloke with a bit of glitter or a bloke with a bit of eyeshadow. Of course, glam rock boys wore makeup, and then makeup on men would sort of disappear for a good 10 years until it reappeared with the new romantics of the early 1980s. Some of my students confuse glam rock with the new romantic movement, and so I whipped together a little video here on the Ultimate Fashion History. Glam rock versus new romantic. Here you see Marc Bolan, and here 10 years later you see Adam Ant. Boys with makeup, but coming from a very, very different place. And just to drive home the idea that whereas Bowie was a cultural influencer, Bolan was the fashion influencer, here he is with some of his fans. I don't even have to tell you why he influenced them. Look at all of these corkscrew perms. I got these images off the internet. I couldn't find out who they belonged to. So if the owners of these pictures happen upon them, forgive me for nicking them from you. But you all look so great. How could I not include them in this video? Another remarkable thing about Marc Bolan is that he was equally loved by girls and boys. Don't you love this picture? From the early 1970s, from some sort of sixth form college. And look at how many boys have Marc Bolan hair. Aren't they adorable? And just on a fashion history note, take a look at the 2 girls there in the lower right-hand corner. I'll blow them up a bit. This is the absolute height of the early 1970s Edwardian revival, when the Edwardian pinafore dress and all of these Victoriana, Edwardiana touches were seen in fashion. And look, there's Nicole in her Edwardian pinafore dress. Yes, growing up there was abuse in my family, but it was mostly of a sartorial nature. By 1975, glam rock was fading and T-Rex was on the decline, but Marc Bolan was not. He really was a true musician, a composer, an artist, and he was moving with the times. He was beginning to associate with the punk movement. There he is with Susie Sue, and here he is with the Ramones, so who knows what may have happened, which makes it such a shame that in 1977, Marc Bolan was killed in a car crash. He was in a Mini driven by his partner Gloria, and the Mini hit a tree and Marc was instantly killed. I was about 12 when Marc Bolan died, and I remember my mother took me aside that morning and told me to be kind to Nicole because she'd be very sad, which she was, although like the rest of the world she had moved on to disco, I believe. Many of his fans turned up at his funeral, and just to nail the point that he really influenced the way that they dressed and looked, look at the way that these 2 girls are dressed with their tight-fitting big lapel jackets and corkscrew perms. Marc was survived by his son, Roland, this handsome man here, who is also a musician and performer and writer. But take a look at this quote. "My name will live on. I'm a lifestyle." Well, his name and his look certainly did live on. Not only did Marc Bolan influence future generations of musicians, Johnny Marr from the Smiths, for example, cites Marc Bolan as one of his big influences, but the fashion world goes back to this metal guru time and time again. His iconic style lives on the runway and in print editorials, stylists and designers often going back to this metal guru for inspiration, even for women's wear. In the early 2000s, when I was in my early 30s, I went through my own personal one-woman glam rock revival and was very influenced by the style of Marc Bolan. There I am with my big flares, and I loved that jacket. You can't see it clearly here, but it was dark purple leather, skin tight with massive winged lapels and very tight sleeves. It was the only time in my life that I did rock and roll as a look and made it work. I'm looking at this picture and oh my God, I thought I was fat then. Well, I really hope you've enjoyed this look at the lovely Marc Bolan. You can contact me through my website, amandahalley.com. Join our Facebook group, The Ultimate Fashion History on Facebook. We always have a fabulous time over there. I'm back every week with new episodes on the UFH, so just click the little circle to subscribe. And remember, guys, I am just a Jeepster for your love. Bye for now.